They're just like, I've never done, I've only done year 5, year 6. I've never done year 3 before. So they're really apprehensive about it. So if you can put their mind at ease, that helps an awful lot.
And sometimes it's who you pair them with. If you're in bigger than a one form entry school, it's sort of like, well, I know you're going to go into a year group you don't like, but you're going to be working with your best mate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or my Tracy this year, I don't mind saying her name, Tracy's been brilliant. Tracy was working with the juniors and didn't really want to go to the infants, and I needed her to go to the infants because it would just fit the jigsaw of last year. And she'd be working, she's part-time, so she'd be working with another teacher who was new to our school, and I knew they'd get on brilliantly.
Yeah.
And so I said to Tracy, look, I need you to do this for me. I know you don't want to go to the infants. I know you don't really want to work with somebody new, but please do it for me. And I promise you that next year I will take your wishes into account for anybody else's.
Yes, yeah.
And she did it for me, bless her. And it's been a great success. And she and this new teacher get on brilliantly.
Excellent.
And when I went to her this year and said, I said to you last year, Tracy, I would take your wishes into consideration for anybody else's. She said, I don't really mind staying here. And please can I keep working with Alicia because we get on really well.
Okay, brilliant.
So,
that's win-win all round.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're listening to a show tonight and you've got any questions for Kate, please do text in, call in. We'd love to hear from you in terms of what questions do you have about your new role. If you're going to be a head teacher in September, if you're going into a new leadership role, what burning questions do you have that you think, I need to ask this, but I'm not sure who to ask today? Kate is the person that you need to ask today. And one of the things that I say on the back of what you said, Kate, is that sometimes also when you're trying to pair people up, especially if you've got a new member of staff, and you're trying to sort of do that jigsaw puzzle and move those post-its around, you've got to think about, right, you can't have 2 new members of staff to the school.
That's right.
In the same class, because you want, you want to be able to make sure they're supported.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I would ask is governors.
Yeah.
Because that can be the other tricky thing in terms of, you've got the finance side and you've got the governance side, and you hear all these, or you hear a lot of horror stories about, governing bodies who, some governing bodies are just too overbearing. Some governing bodies are just too relaxed. They don't get involved in everything. Some governing bodies, you've got governors who just pop in whenever they want to pop in, and have just been used to doing that. So what would your sort of top tips be to kind of working with governors?
You kind of need to work out first how you want to work with your governing board, because if you're the sort of person that doesn't mind the governors popping in whenever they want to, then that's going to be okay. But if you're not, and there's nothing to say you have to be like that, then it's almost, and some of that might just evolve.
Yeah.
But I think the key is to have the best relationship you can with your chair. But more important than the chair, I would say, is the clerk.
Okay.
And obviously I've worked with 4 governing boards, and out of that time I've had 7 different chairs.
Wow.
The chair I've got at the moment, Andrew, is the best chair I've had so far. I've had some good ones, some other good ones, but Andrew's been the best. And the reason I think he's the best is because he has totally got my back, but he's not going to let me get away with anything.
Okay.
So I know I've got him on my side, but I also know that I can't try and pull the wool over his eyes because he's not going to have it.
Yes. Yeah.
But our clerk, Cheryl, she is a clerk to governors. That is her job. She does it for 2 or 3 schools. She does it for at least 2 primaries, and I think and a multi-academy trust, for a secondary multi-academy trust. She's clerk of the board, trust board. And I think having a clerk who is a professional clerk, as opposed to someone that comes along and takes the minutes, is really important. And when we've been between chairs, or when we've had a chair that maybe is good, but we had a chair that was brilliant, but she then found she couldn't really afford the time anymore because her circumstances changed. It was the clerk and I that talked together about how we were going to get the next chair and what we were going to do and who would be good at it, who could we ask, who might want to stand. Because the clerk's almost independent, if you like. They're not a governor, they're not a member of staff, and it's their job. They're the only person that gets paid for sitting in the meetings.
Yeah.
So I think a good relationship with your clerk is really important. And if you buy a service from a local authority or something for your clerk, it doesn't mean you can't have that relationship.
Yeah.
You've got to cultivate it, and don't let the clerk run it, because that's the other thing that can happen sometimes.
Okay.
You know, my Cheryl is absolutely brilliant, and I don't think she's listening, but if she was, She is absolutely amazing. But there are still sometimes when she emails me and says, "You need to do this and you need to do that," and I go back, "No, I don't."
Okay, right, yeah,
Or I
yeah,
might, but I'm not doing it like that yet. Or we did the other day. She said, "Oh, we need to do the exclusions policy." I said, "No, we don't. We did it in the autumn." "Oh, yes." She
right,
says, "You're right." So it's it's any professional relationship, but the chair and the clerk, I think, are the most important, because if you get that right,
yeah,
the rest will just fall into place. If you've got a governor who's in there with their own agenda, then you and the chair will sort that out, or the chair will sort it out for you. If you've got a governor who's not pulling their weight, or a governor who's whatever the issue is, if
yeah,
you, the chair, and the clerk are all coming from the same place, and you've got that good relationship, then you can deal with it, you can manage it.
yeah, yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I have a really good relationship with my chair of governors, and it's one of those, like you said earlier, when you can just drop them a text message or just quickly phone them
Yeah,
to ask them a question. I think that's the best type of relationship,
yeah,
because then you know that there's, you know that if you want to do something, chances are they're going to say,
yeah,
that's fine, as long as it is in the remit of, the policies and what have
yeah,
you. And you need that, when you've got that support. So I recently had quite a difficult situation with regard to a member of staff, and she was like, "You know what, Amanda, I've got you. You've got my full support. However you want to deal with it,
mm,
it's fine." And that's what you need to know, knowing that, okay, you've got the autonomy to do that, but you still got somebody who you can revert to if necessary, and will
yes,
support you,
yeah,
and know that if something does happen, you've got their backing.
yeah. My first chair of governors, he and I used to have stand-up rows in my office before a governor's meeting, but then we'd
Gosh.
go out to the governor's meeting and we'd be a united front.
Yeah, yeah.
We'd have our disagreements in the office beforehand,
Okay.
and he actually did a reading at my wedding. So we might
Oh,
we might have had our disagreements, but we did
yeah,
get on very well. But that again, I was more than, well, not more than happy, but I was willing to have those disagreements with him in private,
yeah,
because when we went out to sit at the table in front of the rest of the board, we were united.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really important, because it's important for the rest of the governing body and staff to see that as well, because I think the governing board needs to be seen amongst,
Yes.
it's part of the school community, and
Yeah.
they need to know that the governors are there, and obviously
Mm,
ultimately the governors are there to hold you to account,
yeah.
that they are there to make sure that you're doing the job that they've employed you to do.
And
S-
it's a hard one with governors and staff as well, because I've had, in every school I've worked in, it's been like this.
mm,
If you as the head, you're inviting the governors in a lot, or they're coming in a lot because
yeah,
that's what you want, you get staff going, "Oh, the governors are always in, they never leave us alone."
yeah.
And then if the governors don't come in, they're like, "Those governors, they never come in." And you think the
Yeah.
poor governors can't win, you know. So again, I think that's the head's job, to balance that with the staff and explain to them why they're in, and it's not threatening. They are part of us,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
and that's
exactly.
how it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I try as much as possible. When we have certain training and development, I'm like, right, let me get the governors to come along to
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
because I think it's important. One, that
Yeah.
they know what training we're doing and are part of it,
Mm,
but two, it's another opportunity to show the staff team that the governors are part of the school community, and that
definitely.
they're engaged in the same things that we're engaged in, and that they have that shared understanding as well.
Yeah. And that also comes back to that professionalism of, if you are having a rough time with your governing board, don't slag them off in the staff room.
Yes, yeah,
You
yeah,
know, do it with
yeah,
your deputy head, or do it with your, leadership team, or do it with another head down the road to get it off your chest, but don't do it in
yeah,
front of the other staff, because they'll
yeah.
remember that.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah. The other question that I would ask, and this is again, happened to me recently. So in the school that I'm at, if you came to my school, we're in the centre of Greenwich, and the school's very green.
Yeah.
It's green, you know, walls outside, window sills, there's a big green wall, doors, there's green everywhere. And I like green, but not that much. And so I um, emailed my chair of governors and the chair of the premises committee, and I said, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing with some of the DFC funding.
Mm.
What's your affiliation with the Green and the school? And they both came back and said, we can't stand it. It's like, fantastic, let's get the ball rolling. But it's things like that, in terms of knowing what how far you can go with looking at the fabric of the building before you have to seek that um, uh, permission. And obviously, some of it comes down to how much money you're going to spend.
Mm.
But what point do you have to kind of say, okay, I want to paint the hall. Do I need to ask the governors what color paint? How do you sort of manage those kind of things?
the governors should be strategic and not operational.
Yeah.
That's what you should keep in your head.
Mm.
Is choosing the colour for the hall walls strategic?
Mm.
No, it's not their job. It literally is as simple as that. I know that
Yeah.
sounds really quite harsh and
No.
cutting. I
Yeah.
don't mean it that in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way, but it literally is as simple as that. Is it strategic or is it operational?
Mm.
Like you've said with the green, if there's a big history with it, or you think there
Yes.
might be a big history with it, it's about emotional intelligence, isn't it?
Mm. Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
checking with the community. My get out for that one, if you think that the adults aren't going to like it, but you really think you want to change it and you think the children will like it, get the children to suggest it.
Mm.
Get the
Yeah.
children to say they don't like
Yeah.
green anymore and could please have blue or whatever it is, because adults will find it very difficult to say no to children,
Yes.
especially if
Yeah.
you're on the side of the children.
Yeah.
But it's in terms of knowing what you can and can't do, I would, if you have no idea whatsoever, I would literally get somebody from your local authority or your motor academy trust who's in charge of that area to come down and do a walk around with you. And you say, so if I want to do that, how do I go about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I want to do this, and they'll go, oh, you can't take that down because that's
Mm.
part of this and that won't work. But you could do this and you could do that.
Yeah.
The other thing also is to check your scheme of delegation with your finances, because there'll be a certain amount of money you can spend
Yeah.
on your own and a certain amount you have to get governor permission for. And that will give you a benchmark for sort of the size of the jobs that you can decide on your own and the size of jobs that you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the ones that you have to get the 3 quotes for and the ones that you don't. Because that sort of, just the very fact that you might have to get 3 quotes for it and then have it approved by governors
Yeah.
means actually that's quite a big deal. You probably
Yeah.
shouldn't be dealing with that on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if it's you can pay for it on your own, you don't have to get 3 quotes and you can just get a man or woman to come in and do it for you,
Yes.
then you can just decide.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good.
But
Yeah.
again, if you think it's going to be unpopular, hide behind the children.
No, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because we do this thing called Topical Tuesday, and a few weeks ago, that was my question in terms of, right, Mrs. Wilson wants to repaint the hall. What colour should it be? And we got some very interesting answers from the children in terms of colours, and we're an Anglican school, and so some people were being very theological and saying it should be purple because that's a holy colour, and white because it's the colour of angels. And one child just said it doesn't matter because a wall's a wall. So very philosophical. So it was good to kind of, like you said, gauge the ideas of children, because at least then they feel part of it. And they know what's happening in the school as well. So when they come back after the summer and they see that the walls are different colour, they're going to know that, oh, this is as a result of our suggestions or things that we kind of put in on Topical Tuesday. So I think getting the children involved is really important. Talking about children, and this will be something that comes up, or may come up with some schools depending on where you are. I just wanted to touch on exclusions, and obviously, with exclusions, it's a very touchy subject because you don't want to exclude for the wrong reason and then find it comes back on you. And so when it comes to having to exclude a child, apart from going through your behaviour policy, and obviously, behaviour policy, but it doesn't cover every eventuality. So how do you as a head teacher know that you're making the right decision about an exclusion, especially when it comes to, well, how long do I exclude this child for? Because that not every eventuality that happens is going to be in your behaviour policy. So how do you go about making that decision?
I had quite a lot of experience with this when I was a deputy head. So again, I learned from the head that I worked with as a deputy.
Yeah.
Because at that time, that was in year 2000 in the school in Lambeth, and he was new at the same time as I was.
Okay.
And in that first term, he did 240 fixed term exclusions.
Wow.
The same term a year later, he did 14.
Wow. Okay.
And so I learned everything I know about exclusions from him. And you kind of just, it's about knowing the children. So it's about being equitable and not being equal.
Yeah.
For me, it is anyway. So it's not about, if anybody does this thing, I'm excluding them.
Okay.
Because for some children, they're going to do that thing because of a different reason that is different to the vast. See, so in our school, I would say we have zero tolerance for most children for most of the time.
Yeah.
Not every child all the time.
Yeah.
Because there are, for some children for whom the behaviour that they display I wouldn't accept that off another child.
Mm.
And it's not that I accept it off that child, it's just that there are reasons behind
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and they will have a risk assessment, or they'll have something else in place to help them with that behaviour. So it's not always as cut and dried as sometimes I think people think it is.
Yeah.
In terms of how long, it's always been for me about the child again. Have I done 2 or 3 one-day exclusions over the last few months?
Okay.
Does this one need to be a bit longer?
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, and I learned this from only recently, did I learn this
Mm.
from a head of school at one of our alternative provisions in East Sussex.
Okay.
And he came and did a staff training with us. And he said, you have to ask yourself who the exclusion is for. If the
Mm.
exclusion is for the child itself, because you're saying to that child, you've crossed a line, we don't accept that here, and this is what
Yeah.
happens if people do this,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay.
If the exclusion is to teach the other children that behaviour is not acceptable,
Yeah.
and that because this child did this, this is what has to happen to them now, that's also okay.
Mm.
But if the exclusion is to appease adults,
Right.
that's not
Yeah.
okay at all.
Yeah. Okay.
And that really resonated with me, those 3 things, because sometimes it isn't about the child itself. It's
Yeah.
telling the rest of the children, the rest of the school community, the rest of the children in the school or the class, or that were in the playground when the thing happened,
Mm.
that we don't tolerate that here, and this is what has to happen to that child now.
Yeah.
Or it's
Yeah.
helping that child themselves to understand or whatever. But if it's not going to help that child, if it's not going to help the other children, it's just to make an adult feel better because they didn't
Yeah.
like what happened and they want to get their pound of flesh,
Yeah.
then that's not okay.
Yeah. And
Um,
yeah, and that's a
yeah,
hard decision to make, isn't it? Because you've got,
massive.
if you've got, especially if it comes down to things like you've got a child who has, caused some kind of physical harm to a member of
Mm,
staff, and that member of staff, like you
yeah,
said, that
yep, yeah,
they, well, this child has done this to me, so therefore they
mm,
shouldn't be in school. But
yeah,
yet there are underlying reasons for
yes,
that
yes.
behaviour.
Or maybe the member of staff has said something to that child in a way that
Yeah.
is not part
Yeah.
of our code of conduct.
Yeah.
And while it's not a disciplinary offence, it's something that made that child react in the way they did.
Yeah.
It's almost like, well, I can see where I don't agree with the child and I don't condone what they've done, but I can see how it happened.
Yeah.
And actually, it's the adult that could have stopped it from happening.
Yeah.
That sort of situation is really, really hard.
And how do you
Um,
deal with that? Because if you've got a member of staff who's
we
like,
had
well, that
that a
child
couple of
needs to
years
be
ago.
out, what do you do?
We had it a couple of years ago,
Okay.
which was exactly that. We had a child who had a risk assessment, which meant that you had to speak to them in a certain way.
Mm.
And it was a member of lunchtime staff did not speak to them in the way they were supposed to and did it differently. And he
Right.
pushed them.
Right.
And he pushed them out of frustration.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it okay.
Mm.
But I didn't exclude him for it. He did have a sanction, but it wasn't an exclusion.
Mm.
And this particular member of staff and a few others were sort of like, almost like pitchforks at dawn almost.
Yeah.
And I said, the only way. I said, he had a little group of friends as well. So these children think that adults don't like them.
Yeah.
It is
Okay.
our job as adults to convince them that we do. And one of them said, but we don't. I said, they don't need to know that.
Not
Pretend
helpful.
we are the adults, they are the children. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes when I can remember being punched in the stomach by an 8-year-old girl once in the middle of a lesson.
Yeah.
And it really winded me.
Yeah.
And it was, I was really in pain from being winded.
Mm.
And you've got to get over it and get on with what you're doing. And it's not nice and it's not right,
No.
but it still happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're a predominantly middle class school,
Mm.
and this sort of thing still happens in our school. So, it's not the schools where these things don't happen don't exist. And if people think they do, then they're in the wrong profession.
Yeah.
It's hard. It is
Yeah.
hard. I've only done one permanent exclusion in 17 years.
Okay.
And I did that permanent exclusion because we literally had nowhere else to go.
Mm.
And I knew that if I permanently excluded her, she would get into the alternative provision.
Okay.
And if I didn't, she wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because we'd tried already.
Yeah.
And we'd had the end of the summer term had been horrendous. We literally incidents every day, health and safety incidents against staff, against children, etc., etc. You can imagine.
Mm.
The first day back in September was a reintegration meeting.
Right.
And she was there with all her nice uniform, and we were talking to her and her mum, and yes, she was going to behave, and yes, she was looking forward to being in year 6, and yes, she was going to toe the line. Within an hour, she'd absconded from school,
Right.
and put herself in danger. And I just had to say, you
Yeah.
know, we could not help her.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't a case of we're not prepared to help her, or we don't want her. It was we've run out of
Yes. Yeah. You've
we've used
exhausted
all the
everything.
weapons in our arsenal. We've got
Yeah.
nothing left.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't help her anymore.
And I guess at that point you would have gone to all the external organizations.
We'd
You
used
kind of
them.
got as
We'd done
many
them.
people in
Yeah,
as possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you've
yeah,
exhausted every
yeah.
avenue to try and support the
Absolutely.
child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing we hadn't done was we hadn't got an EHCP, and without an EHCP, she couldn't go to the alternative provision along the normal routes.
Okay.
And I did the permanent exclusion, and she left the school with her mum, and I cried. Just
Oh.
sat in the office and cried because I felt
Yeah.
I'd failed. I felt I'd failed her.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't helped her. We just, she did end up at the alternative provision, but I'm not sure how successful that was.
Yeah.
And it's still, even now, I sort of think, did we miss something? Could we have done something more? Should I have done that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because you want it, it is, you don't, in most cases, and I know this is a contentious subject, you do it because that is the last resort.
Yeah.
And you've exhausted every avenue. And I'm going to say this lightly, but from my opinion, in particular in primary schools, it is a case of, because they're smaller, because the children that much better
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, it's like, well, everything there is to know about that child.
Yeah.
And so for you to have to get to the point where you think, what,
Yes.
this is the only way,
Yes.
then, it is heartbreaking, because you think, where else can I go? What else can we do? Because you're thinking about the child, you're thinking about the individual, you're not thinking about, like you said, this isn't about the staff or anyone else. This is like, what is the right thing for this child at this point in time? And how can I make sure that this child has at least a chance of having some success in education? And if that means not being at my school and start having a fresh start somewhere else, then that's a decision that has to be made.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to take a short break, and then after the break, Kate, I'm going to have one more question for you, because I know, like you said, you've had a long night, governor's meeting.
So I'm working at home tomorrow, so we're all right for a bit.
Okay, so we're going to take a break for the news, and then I've got a couple more questions for you. But those that are listening, please stick with us. If you've got any questions for Kate, then please feel free to call in after the break.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Bloomfield Collegiate School in Belfast is to enforce a restriction on pupils' use of mobile phones until the end of term. This will include use on site before school, in registration, and in classroom activities. Principal Guy Greer stated that they were acting over concerns about pupils' mental health and their ability to socialise. He said that these concerns stemmed from too much screen time during lockdown. He has received reports that there have been 30 minutes of absolute silence on school buses, as all of the students were using mobile phones, and he believes that they need to get students talking again. Northern Ireland's interim mental health champion, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, has previously said that some things that made life meaningful had been taken from children and young people due to lockdown and the pandemic. Research led by the University of Bristol has found that more than half of teachers in England are in favour of teaching children to take direct action against climate change. Professor Howard Jones believes that Greta Thunberg has inspired school children and that climate change is something they feel passionately about, despite being underrepresented in the national curriculum. He believes that with COP26 being hosted in Glasgow this year, in November, this is an ideal time to reflect on how we are preparing young people for the defining issue of today. Professor Ken Muir, former Chief Executive of the General Teaching Council for Scotland, will lead the work towards a new organisation to replace the Scottish Qualifications Authority. The Scottish Education Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, is to establish a Children's and Young People's Education Council to ensure that the voices of those most affected by any changes in education are always heard loudly and clearly. Ms Somerville has told MSPs that she wanted to be in a position to confirm central planning assumptions for the awarding of qualifications in 2022 for the start of the school term in August. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Amanda Wilson. I'm joined by Kate Elbridge, who is a head teacher in Kent, did you say?
East Sussex. I live in Kent, but I work in East Sussex.
There you go. I knew there was a Kent in there somewhere. And Kate has been sharing with us her kind of, based on her experience, 17 years experience of being a head teacher and more than 20 years of being in schools, kind of what she's learnt and how she can help people to prepare for that role as a headship. And it's been interesting because, like I said at the beginning, nothing can ever really fully prepare you. But having this conversation with you, Kate, it's kind of like you can go to courses and you can do the MPQ. I've not done the MPQH, but you can do the MPQH, and I did a sort of aspiring heads course with the Southwark Diocese. But it's those things that they don't cover. It's those things that you don't really like the who's responsible for, if you want to paint the school or if you want to do the exclusions, those nitty-gritty things, those everyday things that are really important for you to know as a head teacher, because those are the things that are going to be dropped at your door, and those are the things that people are going to say, okay, well what are we going to do here? How are we going to manage this? I mean, things like, I don't know if you've had experiences of things like qualifying complaints from Ofsted and sort of just having to suddenly realise that, oh, okay, somebody's made a phone call. I mean, last year, you have to wonder about some people, but last year when the George Floyd murder happened, we did a collective worship on it, but then we also showed the diversity video and the diversity dance group video, and somebody contacted Ofsted and complained. And obviously, something like that, Ofsted will go to the ladder, and the ladder will contact, which is local authority designated officer. They will contact, the school and say, this is the complaint that's been made. Can you respond? But as a head teacher, especially a new head teacher, it can suddenly make you take a sharp intake of breath. I think,
Absolutely.
oh my gosh, Ofsted are going to come knocking on the door. How have you dealt with situations like that in the past?
You do, the sharp intake of breath is absolutely right, and it still happens now because your first reaction is, oh my god, I'm going to be in really massive trouble, I've done something wrong. And then you take the step back and you look at it, and it's never as bad as you think it is. I mean, our one was it was a long time ago now. It was one of my other schools where a parent had complained to Ofsted that her child was made to get undressed into their nativity costume in the church and was naked in front of the vicar.
Oh gosh.
Which wasn't true at all.
Of course not, no.
There'd been something had happened and the children were late getting to the church, so the vicar, who was also the chair of governors and had a DBS check and all the rest of it, was helping the adults to change the children. Nobody was naked. When the local authority rang this and they went back to Ofsted, and what I got back from the local authority in the end was, when the parents had been challenged, they're going, oh no, we didn't mean naked, we meant in their underwear, which was very different. So I don't really know what can prepare you for it. It's almost being confident in your own position, and that you know that you haven't done anything wrong. And actually,
Yeah.
if you have done something wrong, hold your hands up and go,
Yeah.
gosh, I didn't realize that. Or, yes, that was my mistake. This is what I've done to rectify it.
Yeah.
I did a GDPR breach by mistake a little while ago.
Mm.
I'd put something in my head teacher's blog on the website that somebody had actually read it, and then they complained to the local authority about it because they
Right.
knew that what I'd put in was a breach, and I didn't realise it was a breach. And I was beside
Okay.
myself because I'd done it
Right.
by
Yeah.
accident.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was relatively easily rectified, and there was no harm done.
Mm.
But so it's the two things. Take a deep breath and think about what's just happened
Yeah.
and how you're going to work through it.
Yeah.
Having the confidence in knowing what your own position is and what the situation actually is. And if you have mucked up, because we all do from time to time, hold your hands up and say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
Because it will work itself out.
Yeah.
I was just going to say something else. It's just gone out of my head because I have menopause brain, I'm afraid. I can't think what it was. No, it's gone.
No. Okay. And I guess hopefully as I'm talking, it might come back to you. But I
Yeah,
guess that's the same with parental
it's
complaints that comes
exactly the
directly
same.
to school. Yeah.
It's exactly the same. Exactly the same. And sometimes you just got to, one of my heads of school will write the email back to the parents and not send it and come back
Right.
to it later
Yes.
and then edit it.
Yeah.
I used to write out the letter on scrap paper, but
Yeah.
not give it to the office to type up
Yeah.
and come back to it later. What I tend to do now is I just tend to sit on it for a while, and it'll come to me how I want to respond when
Yeah.
I'm cleaning my teeth or in the shower. It's normally in the morning. It's obviously got up and it's popped into my head. The thing about issues with parents is that if they carry rumbling on, they are all consuming.
Yes.
They take up
Yes.
all
Yeah.
of your waking time. They take time away from your family. They take time away from you at the weekend, because until it's resolved,
Yeah.
and it's, to be perfectly honest, it's probably the same for the parents,
Yeah.
because they're
It's
just
true.
as cross or just as angry or just as worried or whatever it is. But until it gets resolved, you can't escape from it. And that's where you really need to consider, or not even consider, you need to know yourself and know how you need to best deal with that. Whether you need to go out and get plastered, whether you need to go and see a friend and offload it, whether you need to speak to a counsellor, whatever it is that you need. And that comes down to you knowing yourself.
Yeah.
I know that I need to resolve things as soon as possible,
Mm.
or have my different scenarios mapped out in my head.
Okay. Yeah.
It could go like this, or it could go like that, or it could go like this. Right, it's going to be one of those three things. Fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine with all those three
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about knowing yourself and knowing how you manage those things. And if you don't know yourself, you don't know that yet, because I don't think I knew this when I was younger. I think it comes with age. I was going to say maturity, but I don't even think it's maturity. I think it's just age and experience.
Yeah.
If you don't know yourself yet, then I really would consider accessing some kind of counselling, or one of those services that you can normally get through your union or through your local authority or through your school, to explore that with a professional.
Yes. Yeah.
So that you can work out what your triggers are, what you know is really going to set you
Yeah.
off,
Yeah.
and how you know you're going to deal with something later on.
Yeah, that's I think a key point, and that kind of just we're coming to sort of near the last few minutes of the show, or last few minutes, but last 10 minutes or so. But I think that's something that I think would be good to touch on, in the sense of the last few points, is about head teacher well-being. And how do you make sure that you look after yourself as a head teacher, because things can become very overwhelming at different points in
Yeah.
the year. This past year for many of us has just been it's just totally knocked us to one side, just with the sheer volume of information that we've had to process and the care that we've had to give to everyone around us. So from your point of view, for somebody who's going new into headship or into that senior leadership role, what advice would you give in terms of them looking after themselves?
I would say that people always say that headship is a lonely job. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
It can be. It can be really lonely, but it doesn't have to be. And again, I've said this to my two new heads groups, is there will be a local cluster whether
Yeah.
it's within your MAT, or whether it's in your local authority, or in our local authority, we don't have a distinction between them. Our local cluster has MAT heads in it as well as local authority heads.
Okay.
And within that cluster, you are going to click with somebody or a couple of people, and they're more than the others. Make your head teacher friends,
Yeah.
because they are the ones that you can. And as I say, I've got two, Kate Bishop, Katie O'Shea. They're both brilliant. Well, they would be. They've got the same name as me. But, you know, we are a really tight little threesome, and we WhatsApp each other all the time. And there was something that happened to me just before Christmas that was awful, and I thought it was going to blow up into something huge, and it didn't, luckily. But I remember texting them. I was outside the school building, and it was dark, and I'm texting them going, "Oh my goodness, this has happened. I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? What should I do? The local authority going to go spare?" And immediately they came back and they went, "Get in first." Authority, yes, I agree with Kate. Ring the local authority. You get tell them first. And actually, it was fine. The whole, but that was me going, help, and
Yeah.
them saying, do this.
Okay. Yeah.
And those, I don't just mean head teacher colleagues. I mean head teacher friends.
Yeah.
People you would go out with outside of school.
Yeah.
And whenever the three of us meet up, which we do, well, we did when you were allowed to regularly, we always start off with what we call our Alcoholics Anonymous bit, where we literally start off by saying, this is the crap thing in my school at the moment.
Okay.
And we all have an offload about the one thing that's doing us in, because there's always something. Whatever job you're in the world, there's always something that's driving you mad. And we offload that first, and then we start talking about whatever we're talking about. So that would be my key thing. Find yourself, find your tribe, find your local people that you can drive around to their school at lunchtime and cry in their office if you need to. Yeah. Because they get it, because they're doing the same job as well. Yeah. And they'll be there for you, and you'll be there for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. And just in closing, Kate, it's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you tonight, and I really appreciate you answering all those the questions, because I think it's been really helpful, and will be really helpful for those that have been listening and those that listen back. But from your view, you know, you've been in headship for 17 years now. What would you say is the best thing about being a head teacher?
It's the same. God, I could cry now. It's the same thing that's the best thing about being a class teacher.
Okay.
It is having responsibility for a group of people, whether it's your staff, whether it's the whole school community, all the children in the school, or whether it's a group of parents, and being part of them thriving, being part of their development. And that teacher I'd said about earlier, who's going off to be an assistant head in September, he was my first appointment at the school I'm at now, and he was an NQT.
Oh, wow.
And he's going to be an assistant head.
Wonderful. And
I'm gutted to be losing him, because he's a great teacher and he's a great leader, and the children, parents and staff all us all back. And he said he doesn't really want to leave our school, but he wants to develop his career, and he wants to go on to a bigger challenge. He's going to a school in special measures where he's going to be absolutely brilliant. And that still makes me feel proud and makes me feel that I'm doing a good job, and that's what I love about it. Just like it was when I was a class teacher, and you'd see those children develop and learn and go on to bigger and better things. It's exactly the same.
Yeah. It's almost like you're having a proud mummy moment with a member of staff.
It's exactly like that.
Yeah.
Exactly like that.
You know, you've kind of put all that you can into them. You know, you've done it.
But
the
it's
best
the
you
same
can.
when you work with a family, you know, when you get a family in difficulty, and you can actually be part of helping them get out of that.
Yeah.
That's the best thing about being a head. It's not just about the children in your class.
Yes.
It's also their families. It's also the staff.
Yeah.
You're part of the community.
Yeah, definitely.
And when you walk through the park at the end of the day, like I did today, from one of my sites to the other site, and some teenager goes, "All right, Miss Obridge," from the football pitch, and I'm like, "I'm fine, Alfie. How are you?" You know, that's when you think I'm part of this community.
Yes, yeah, and that is must be the best feeling in the world is just knowing that, and it's, you know, when you've got children that go on, you know, adults that come back, because they've, you know, they still feel part, because you are, and that is the kind of, like you said, that is the icing on the cake, is when you've got those students who will come back, or those parents that will come back and say, this is what you've done for me, this is how you've helped my family, this is how you supported me. Because like you said, it's not just about the children, it's about the family. And if the family are okay, then the children are going to be okay. And it makes our jobs a lot easier.
you know, I always said all the children come first, children come first. The children do come first, but in order to let the children come first, you have to put the staff first.
Yeah.
Because if the
Yeah.
staff aren't doing their jobs properly, the children won't come first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah, it's the best job in the world.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's a great soundbite to end on. Thank you so much for your time
You're
tonight, Kate.
welcome.
It's been absolutely amazing speaking to you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the depth of experience that you've brought to this conversation tonight. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I don't know everything by any stretch of the imagination. I can only talk from my experience and what I've done, but I hope it helps people,
Yeah.
because it is the best job in the world.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Go and get your proper rest now.
Thanks.
Okay, you take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That was Kate Albridge, who, I mean, it's just so encouraging when you listen to a fellow head teacher who has got that depth of experience. And that's, I think, from any role in leadership, if you can sit at someone's feet and you can be teachable, I don't think there's ever a point in time where I've not wanted to just sit and learn from somebody. You know, there's never a time when you know it all. Even as Kate said, you know, she you know, despite the years of experience that she's had, there's always something new. And I think if you are willing as a leader to sit at someone's feet, to listen, to learn, to take on board their advice, their guidance, then you can only become the best that you can be. And I think when it comes to headship, when it comes to leadership, it is those support networks that keep you going. It is those support networks that help you to get through the difficult days. You know, I have, you know, as a head teacher, I still am still very good friends with the executive head teachers that were over me when I was a head of school. I'm part of an action learning group. I have a group of, you know, church school head teachers that I'm friends with. You know, I have other friends that may not be in senior leadership that I can talk to. You need to have that network around you to kind of be able to support you in the good and in the bad. Being a leader is a difficult job. It's a challenging job, but as Kate said, it's such a rewarding job, because when you get that feedback from the families, from the children, from the parents, from the staff, it encourages you to think, you know what, I am doing a good job. I'm doing okay. Even when you have those really bad days, even when, like, you know, this morning for me, it kind of started off a bit rocky, but even despite that, there's usually something that happens that makes you think, you know what, this is not such a bad job after all. And even sometimes, you know, you do have those really challenging times in your career where you do want to pack up, give it all up, you know, go and find another job, you know, sort of be a red coat somewhere in Butlins, and something that you think is less stressful but more enjoyable. But actually, there's just something about working in a school that, you know, and you know, I've done a few roles. You know, this was being working in schools was a second career for me, and I worked in retail beforehand in my 20s and early 30s. So I've kind of done other things before I became an educator. But I think I wake up every morning and I enjoy going to work. And I think when you're in that position, then you know you're in the right job. When you get to the position where you wake up in the morning and you dread going to work, that's the time when you need to reconsider. But for anyone who's taken on headship, anyone who is starting a role in September, you know, please do touch base with those experienced head teachers. You know, Twitter is a fantastic place. Touch base with Kate. She has some great training programs that she offers for new head teachers, for new leaders, that will really kind of help you to get that information that you need. You know, feel free to text me, or to tweet me at Amanda Wilson 910. You know, I'm more than happy to connect with you. You know, we need to kind of come together as a head teacher community, as a leadership community, to support one another. There are lots of head teacher networks out there. It's about finding one that suits you as an individual and making sure that you can get the best out of it. You know, as I mentioned before, the Secret Head Teacher has a blog, and he's put lots of tips for new head teachers and new leaders on there. Another great resource to use. Please don't feel that you are on your own. Please don't feel that you have to go through your first few weeks, months, or years as a head teacher or as a leader in a school on your own. We are here to support you. And on that note, just suffice for me to say it's been a great show. I've really enjoyed this show, really enjoyed listening to Kate, and kind of being able to pull on her knowledge. I hope you've enjoyed listening. Please do leave comments, tweet at TT Radio 2021. Let us know what you thought of the show. Let us know what you want to hear from us as presenters, as hosts, because we want to make sure that we're providing the content that you want to listen to. It's been a pleasure hosting the show tonight. I'm off to bed, ready to start counting down to the weekend. I will see you next week.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.